Hey, 6th grade. Welcome to Lesson 4, Day 3. Do you remember yesterday when we used a table and we were talking about there were 4 pounds of tomatoes for $6 and we filled out the table to find all sorts of different equivalent ratios? Well, today's lesson is going to be very similar. The only difference is we're talking about speed of something rather than price of tomatoes. So here's what's going to happen today. First, your book should be on page 30. If it is not, pause this video, go get your book, open it to 30, and come back. Now, second, I'm going to give you directions throughout this to pause the video, do problems, try it. I want you to follow those directions, do what I say, because that's how you're going to learn the most in this video. All right, third, how we're going to do it is we're going to go over this page, which is going to show you 2 different models to answer a question. And then on the next page, on page 31, you're going to be working on some problems on your own, and then you're going to watch the video to check your answers. So let us get started here by reading this problem about Bill at the top of the page. It says, Bill drove 200 miles in 4 hours. I'm going to put a box around that because that is a ratio right there. And I'm going to continue. It says, at this speed, how long will it take him to drive 300 miles? How long will it take him to drive 400 miles? So using the ratio 200 miles in 4 hours, we should be able to find out how far he'll go at that speed in 300 miles and in 400 miles. Okay, so now let's go down to the 2 strategies here. The one is going to be model it using a double number line, and the other is going to be similar to something we did yesterday. So let's start with the double number line. First, it says you can show the relationship between miles and hours using a double number line. Down here it says you know that in 4 hours, Bill travels 200 miles. Now notice that ratio is right there. Okay, I'm going to continue. It says the same vertical line is labeled with 200 miles in 4 hours. So they're saying this vertical line right here is labeled with 204. Okay, if you divide both quantities in this ratio by 2, you find that in 2 hours he travels 100 miles. So let me explain that. They are saying if you divide both of these quantities by 2, you'll figure out that in 2 hours he'll go 100 miles. So that gets you the second ratio. And then I'll continue here. It says divide both quantities in the ratio 100 to 2 by 2, and you find that in 1 hour he travels 50 miles. So what they're saying here is if you divide each of these by 2, you'll get 1 hour for 50 miles. Okay, so let me erase all that slop. And just so you know, we're looking at this point, we're looking at these 3 ratios. Okay, so now let's go down to the bottom. This is similar to what we did yesterday, and I thought it was kind of cool, so I think it's kind of cool today as well. So this says, here is one way you can use the quantities labeled on the double number line to complete the rest of it. Fill in the blanks below, and then finish labeling the number line. All right, so I'm going to start you off here. It says 3 hours is 2 hours plus 1 hour, right? So let me go back up to the number line. So 2 hours plus 1 hour gets you 3 hours. Okay, and you could fill this in with me as you're doing this part. And blank miles equals 100 miles plus 50 miles. Well, what's 100 plus 50 miles? It's 150, right? So what they're saying is, up here, 50 plus 100 is 150. So basically, if I erase some of the slop again here, they're saying if you know these 2 add up to 150 and these 2 add up to 3, we just got ourselves a whole new ratio. All right, so far so good. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to try this one on your own. You're going to pause the video in a second, but let's read it. It says 5 hours is 2 hours plus 3 hours. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so blank miles is 100 miles plus 150 miles. So what I want you to do is pause the video, figure out what this blank is, and write those numbers somewhere up on your double number line. Pause it, do just that one, and restart it. Go. Okay, let's see how you did. So, 5 hours is 2 hours plus 3 hours, and 250 miles is 100 miles plus 150 miles. So let's go up to the top. Remember, 2 hours plus 3 hours gets us 5 hours. 100 plus 150 gets us 250 miles. So that should be the ratio, this one right here that you have filled in. So if you have that wrong, make sure you fix it. Now, let's go down to the third one. We'll do this one kind of together. It says 6 hours. Instead of adding them, this time we multiply. We know to find 6 hours, you could just do 2 hours times 3, right? So the question is, how many miles would be 100 times 3? Well, 100 times 3, I'm hoping you can figure that out mentally, is 300. Now, let's go up to the top. So 6 hours is 2 hours times 3. Okay, so what they're saying, I'll switch to green here. If you take 2 hours times 3, you get 6 hours. So then if you do the same thing to the miles, 100 times 3, you get 300 miles in 6 hours. So at this point, we now have another ratio. And remember, I know there are other ways to figure out the ratio. We're just showing you a couple tricks here, how you can use other numbers, combining them to figure out the other ratios. Okay, so now what I want you to do is you're going to pause it and do this one. So figure out the blanks, and then figure out, I think you're figuring out the last two ratios. So pause it, do that, restart it when you're done. Go. All right, let's see what you did. So it says the rate is 50 miles for each hour. Remember, this is, I'm going to put a squiggly circle around it. This is our rate. And just a reminder, rates are always over the number 1. Okay. All right, so this is saying Bill can drive 50 times 7, or 350 miles in 7 hours. So what they're saying is if you know the rate and you multiply it by 7 hours, you'll figure out how far he goes in that time. Oops, sorry. So we know in 7 hours, oh, where's the pen? 7 hours, he goes 350 miles. And here it says, and 50 times 8, or 400 miles in 8 hours. So if you multiply the rate by 8, you'll figure out that he goes 400 miles in 8 hours. All right, so if you need to pause this to correct any mistakes, you can do that now. Otherwise, we are going on to the next page. All right, so now we're on page 31. So here is what you're going to do. First, I want you to notice I took the double number line, which you should have filled out from page 30, and I just put it on the bottom of my page here because it will make it easier for me so I don't have to flip back and forth. Now, you're going to be using that double number line to answer some questions. So what I want you to do is you're going to pause this video, and I only want you doing 9 through 14. Don't do 15 or 16 at the bottom yet. So some of them you're just going to have to write a short little answer, like right here. Some of them you're going to have to write a sentence or two, like right here. So remember the rules. As long as you follow the directions and give it your best shot, that's okay. If you're not sure, so what? Give it your best. If you're wrong, well, when you watch the video after you do these 5 problems, you make your corrections. Or 6 problems, sorry about that. All right, so pause the video, do 9 through 14, restart it when you're done, go. All right, so let's see how you did on number 9. So number 9 says, what does the double number line show as the unit rate? So remember, the rate is the 50 over 1 because it has a 1 as a second number. However, the unit rate is the number on top of the 1. So the unit rate is 50 miles. And remember, that just simply means in an hour you can go 50 miles. That's what a unit rate is. Okay. So now, if you had that, good. If not, pause it and fix it. Let's go on to number 10. Okay, let me move this guy down here. All right, and I'll erase that slop. Number 10 says, show how to use the ratio given in the problem to find the unit rate. So what they are saying, remember the ratio that was given in the problem was 200 to 4. So they are saying, how would you use that to find the unit rate, which is 50? Well, you would just simply divide. You would do 200 divided by 4, and that gets you the unit rate of 50. Okay, so if you had that problem, give yourself a C. If not, you can pause and then continue to go on. Okay, so let me move this picture down again. Okay, we'll go to number 11. So 11 says, how can you use the unit rate to solve the problem? Now, let's go back and talk about the problem. It was on the previous page. So, remember, let me erase the slop here. How can we use the unit rate? Remember, the unit rate was 50 miles in an hour. To figure out how far or how long it will take to go 30 miles and how long it will take to go 400 miles. So, let me go back to the other page. So first thing, to figure out how you would go 300 miles, I would do this. I would say, I know 50 times 6 is 300. Remember, 50 is the unit rate. So, 1 times 6 equals 6 hours. So in 300 miles, you'll go 6 hours. Now the next part's going to be how long will it take you to go 400 miles. So it's going to be similar to that. Say, I know 50 times 8 equals 400. So 1 times 8 equals 8 hours. All right, so all I did is, you don't have to have the exact words for me, but I'm just explaining how I could use the unit rate 50 to figure out these answers here and here. Okay? All right, next. Pause the video if you need to make any corrections. Let's go down to number 12. Number 12 says, suppose you want to know how long it will take Bill to drive 325 miles. How can you use the double number line to do this? All right, now again, you might have a different answer for this, but if you don't understand it, that's when you could write my answer. But for now, I'm going to show you how I would use the double number line to figure this one out. So to figure out how far he goes, 325 miles. And I notice I don't see 325 on the double number line, right? But here's what I do know. Isn't 325 exactly in the middle of 300 and 350? Okay, so then it makes sense that the answer will be exactly in the middle of 6 and 7. So how many hours is between 6 and 7? Wouldn't it be 6.5? 6.5? Okay, so I'm just going to explain what I just did in a sentence or two. So I'm going to say, I know 325 is between 300 and 350. So the answer is between 6 and 7 hours, which is 6.5 hours. Now, if you came up with 6.5 hours, great. Even if you don't have the same sentence that I do, but make sure you explain how you did it. All right, let's go on to number 13. So number 13 says, describe how you can use the unit rate to find how long it will take Bill to drive 325 miles. Okay, so let's go over how I would do this one. So the first thing I would do is to get to 325 miles. Remember, it's going to be right about here. I want to use my unit rate. I want to figure out 50, how to get 50 to 325. In other words, 50 times what is 325? Now, I don't know that right off the top of my head, but here's what I can do to figure out. I can do the opposite. I can do 325 divided by 50, which is 6.5. So here's what that means. That means 50 times 6.5 is 325. Now, to answer my question, I then just multiply the 1 hour by 6.5, and that gets me my answer, 6.5 hours. So that's how I would do it, but I'm going to explain what I just did. Now, if you did something different with the 50 to 1 to get 6.5, you don't have to write what I'm writing, but I'm going to explain what I did. So I'm going to say, I know, let me make this a little bigger for you. I know 50 times 6.5 equals 325. Now remember, I didn't know that. I figured it out by doing 325 divided by 50. Okay, that means 1 times 6.5 gets you the answer 6.5 hours. Okay, so that's my explanation. You can pause and make corrections if you need to, but I'm going to go on to number 14. 14 says, how is solving a problem about constant speed similar to solving a problem about unit price? How are these types of problems different? Okay, so think about it. This is basically the same thing we did yesterday. For example, we figured out that if you add up 1 and 2 hours to get 3 hours, you could add up 50 and 100 miles to get 150. That was just like what we did with the tomatoes in yesterday's lesson, the pounds of tomatoes, $4 with the unit price. So when I'm talking about how they're alike, I'm going to say a couple things. I'm going to say, let's see, let me restate the question. How is solving a problem about constant speed? Okay, so speed and prices are just ratios, or are both ratios. You find a unit rate and a unit price the same way. The math is the same. It's just one is speed, one is money. Now, how are these types of problems different? Well, I'm just going to say unit price deals with the cost of 1 unit. Okay, yesterday the unit was pounds of tomatoes. But unit rate, or constant speed they refer to it as, is how fast you go in 1 hour. Now, your answer for this one, as long as you gave me a way they are both the same, and you gave me a way they are different, I'm okay with what you wrote. All right, or what you wrote. I'll read what you wrote just to see what you said, but you don't have to have the same thing as me. Remember that. All right, so that's number 14. Pause it if you need to. Let's go down to 15 and 16, and I'm going to tell you what you're going to be doing here. So first, in 15 and 16, what I want you to do for the first one is you are only going to pause a video and do number 15 only. Don't do 16 yet. When you're done with 15, you can restart the video and solve it. Now, we will no longer need this table here. So, but you can make your own table to help you with this situation if you need to. If you don't, don't. Go. Do 15 only. Restart it when you're done. Okay. So, in 15, here's what it says. A jet plane flew 1,200 miles in 3 hours. How far will it travel in 2 hours? Okay, so how I solve this might be totally different than you solve this. But this is what I'm going to do. I know 1,200 miles. I'm going to kind of think of a number line here. in 3 hours. Now I'm going to label up here miles and hours. Now I also know they give me how far will it travel in 2 hours, so this is what I have to figure out. I have to figure out what goes here. But the first thing I'm going to do is figure out 1 hour. Now to do that, remember, to find any unit rate, you just divide the miles by the hours. So if I do, let me undo that real quick, if I just do 1200 divided by 3, I get 400. So that means in 1 hour, you go 400 miles. Now, that means, think about this for a second. Since 2 is exactly between 1 and 3, that means our answer is exactly between 400 and 1200. So if I were to do that, I know 800 is between 400 and 1200. But that way is a little bit trickier. Let me show you what I think is another easy way. Remember, if you have the unit rate, your life now becomes very easy. So what I mean is the unit rate is 400 miles, right? So you just multiply it by how many hours you need. What's 400 times 2? It's 800. So the answer is 800 miles. Now, if you had 800 miles and did it a different way, I am okay with how you did it. All right, but now 16. I want you to pause the video, do 16 on your own. If you had 15 wrong, learn from it, and restart it when you're done. Go. All right, so let's see how you did. I'm going to erase that because I won't need it for this one here. So in 16, it says a small plane can't even read here. A small plane flew 240 miles in 2 hours. At that rate, how long will it take to travel 600 miles? All right, so let me start by writing this as a ratio. 240 miles in 2 hours. So there's my ratio. So I'm going to change it to a rate. Remember, a rate has a 1 on the bottom. So to change it to a rate, I know I divide this by 2 and this by 2. And remember, you could use a calculator, and I get 120 miles in 1 hour. Now, your key is this unit rate right here. The 120 miles, it's the unit rate because that's how far you go in an hour. Now, what I'm going to do, this says, how long will it take to travel 600 miles? So the question is, I need to figure out how long it will take to go 600 miles, right? I'm going to put a question mark here because that's going to be my answer, and I'm going to switch to green. So in other words, 120 times what equals 600? Now, unless you know your 120 times tables very well, you probably don't know this one off the top of your head. So remember, I do the opposite. I do 600 divided by 120, which is 5. So that means 120 times 5 is 600. That means 1 hour times 5 would get us our answer of 5 hours. Okay, so the answer in 600 miles, it will take, oops, sorry about that, it will take 5 hours. If you had that right, you're doing great. If you got 15 and 16 right, you are doing everything you need to do. If you're not, you can see me or Mr. Swiger if you're watching this from 6 Black, and we'll give you some help for it. So, you're done with this video. I hope it helped. Thanks for watching, guys.